Hi everyone, this is Mary Gregory. Welcome to Mass Coding TV. Hey, where we do all things coding, where we are into helping you to become the best coder that you can become. We started a lesson on infusion coding, and so we're going to wrap the lesson up today in this video. And I'm going to go back and do just a quick recap. We talked about IV hydration, how IV hydration has to be a minimum of 15 minutes up to 1 hour. A minimum of 31 minutes up to 1 hour for your hydration. So hydration, it gotta run for a minimum of 31 minutes up to an hour. And after an hour, you have an add-on code, but you have to administer that hydration up to 1 hour. We also talked about the fact that once you put a drug into the IV hydration, then you have to count the drug is greater than the IV hydration. In other words, if you put an IV antibiotic into the fluid, then now you're going to either count that as an infusion, depending on if it runs greater than 15 minutes, or you're going to have to count it as a push if it's less than 15 minutes. So we talked about that. We also talked about the fact of what you could and could not bill with this. You don't bill the local anesthesia. You don't bill the IV start kit. All those things are considered supplies, and they're going to be put on the charge master. One of the other things we want to talk about is make sure that you understand that you can only have one initial. I cannot go into all the other nuances that go with this, but we do have a PowerPoint that you can purchase that will go into further details on this. But always remember, you can only have one initial. One initial can be reported only one time unless you have medical necessity and the documentation to support that there was a need for an additional IV site and you had to do a new or an additional initial. And when I look at ED coding, they'll tell me that it was started in the right arm or it was started in the left or both. That is the type of documentation that you're looking for. Did they say they started IV in the right arm? Did they say they started IV in the left arm? Now I have two initials. And my two initials, if I'm going to do that, need a modifier. And that modifier is going to be 59, or it could be an XU modifier. Those are the preferred modifiers when you are doing that. The other thing I want to talk about is make sure that you do not bill a 99211 with these drug administration codes, as they're called. 99211 is an established patient that just pretty much requires a nurse visit. That is factored into the payment for the drug administration. If you have an E&M level supported by documentation that's greater than a 99211, then of course you can bill it depending on if you're a doctor. But remember, doctors can't bill these E&M codes when these drugs are being administered in a facility. So watch out for that. If you're going to do it as a facility, if a facility want to do it, then that facility have to use a G0463 with the appropriate modifier 25. But you got to have documentation that support that. Let's talk about, I actually have a couple of scenarios that I printed out and came up with to kind of help us to understand about the hierarchy. And we talked about this on the other video, but I didn't show this. If you have a hierarchy infusion therapy that's without chemo, infusion is always top dog, push is second, and hydration is always the last one. So, and we talked about the fact that You cannot code by the order in which the drug is given. You code by this hierarchy. So even though they may start the IV hydration first, once they put a drug in there, into the IV fluid, if it's infused, then I'm going to code an infusion. If it's a push, I'm going to code a push. And I may or may not get to code the hydration. Then we also have one for chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is always top dog. So chemotherapy, and then if they need to infuse a drug, Demerol, then I'm going to have not another initial. If they send it through the same IV site, I'm going to have pretty much an add-on code. Then of course I'm going to have a push. That's next, and then hydration. You have to use this hierarchy when you're doing this coding, even when you take your CPC and or your CCS. So let's talk of examples here. If the patient come in and they have an initial administration, let's say a Demerol, and it was infused for 30 minutes, you would bill a 96365 with a unit of 1, because medically unlikely edits are put on these. So generally 96365 should only have a unit of 1. Now of course if you started in a separate arm or leg, if you're dealing with children, sometimes they like to put them in the leg. If you're dealing with that, then yeah, you're going to have a 96365 again with a unit of 1, and you're also going to have a modifier on that. Now, once again, that drug was infused through our IV hydration. And we talked about the fact that when you start an IV hydration, even if it runs for an hour, but when you put that Demerol in there and you infuse it for 30 minutes, you have to subtract 30 minutes out of that IV hydration hour. Therefore, now the IV hydration is less than an hour. And you will not get the code a 96361, an add-on code with that. Another one we had was a patient came into the ED. He was given IV Demerol for 20 minutes and morphine for 20 minutes. What would my coding be? My initial, once again, they may have started the hydration, but once they put that Demerol in there for 20 minutes, I'm going to have a 96365 times 1 time. When they put in the morphine for 20 minutes, now remember, when they put the morphine in for 20 minutes, I can only have one initial, plus it's a new drug. I had a Demerol and I had a morphine. And you can count the 96365 for either one, but you can only have it one time. So I'm going to have a 96365 one time. I'm going to have a 96367 because it did run for 20 minutes. And that's my add-on code for a new drug. So pay attention to this when you take your test. Did they infuse a new drug? Or did they infuse an additional same drug? Did they infuse it? If it was the same drug, I'm going to have a 96365 and a 96366. And you have to pay attention to that. Now, once again, I'm not going to get to count my hydration pretty much, because if it was just for an hour, then guess what? I am going to have to subtract 40 minutes out of that hour. In order to code that add-on code for the hydration, it would have to run another additional hour by itself with nothing being infused in it. So pay attention to that when you are doing your coding for these tests. Because sometimes I think we get kind of confused or mixed up when they give you, when the scenario is so busy. It's a busy scenario. And so you're going to have to step back, take a deep breath, and say, okay, it's a busy scenario, but what is it really asking me? Look at your answer. and then you can code from there. We also had another patient to come into the ED. He had an anaphylactic reaction to a bee sting. He was immediately given some IV epinephrine, push. They gave him a push. Then they gave him a continuous infusion of normal saline for hydration. So we know normal saline is a hydration. So if you're taking a test, you might want to say, okay, I'm going to write down, I'm going to look to see, do they have a 96360? Do they have a 96361? Because that's going to be interesting. I need to know. What did he get? He got an IV push. So my normal saline is just hydration. Then he gave him another push of hydramine, just something to calm him, keep him from having to continue to have the adverse reaction. So now my patient have had 2 IV pushes, okay? So I can only have one initial, so I'm going to have a 96374 and a 96375. If you look in your book, you can see that. 96374, IV push, single or initial, and then 96375, each additional sequential push, say. And I don't have to, if I'm working in a facility, I also have 96376 when it is the push of the same substance. But mine was 2 different substances. So I got a 96374 and a 96375. I will probably not get the code in this here. It didn't tell me, how long the hydration fluid ran. So that's very important if you want to add an add-on code for the hydration. It got to run at least an hour without any other therapeutic substance being infused in it. So watch out there. So we did have a patient 2 to come in with severe dehydration. He received IV infusion on normal saline for 2 hours. So 2 hours is 120 minutes. He ordered an IV push of Reglon for nausea, so that's at least 15 minutes, followed by a 90-minute infusion of magnesium sulfate. Now, magnesium sulfate is not part of that prepackaged hydration, so it gets to be counted as a therapeutic. So I'm going to have, so even though he may have gotten the push first, remember my hierarchy here says infusion go first. It doesn't matter about the order in which they gave the drug. You have to go by this hierarchy here. So I'm going to code an infusion first, 96365. Then I'm going to have a push. I'm also going to have a 96366 because I got an additional drug that was put in there. So yeah, I got a 96365, a push, 96375 for that scenario. And I ran 120 minutes, right? So one of them, let's see here. Because I don't really know exactly how long the magnesium sulfate ran, I'm going to have to assume it was up to an hour. And so once again, that's going to take an hour away from my hydration. And then I did a push into the next hour of the hydration. Therefore, I'm not going to get to code the hydration. Okay, so just want to kind of give you some examples of that, talking through that. We have one more where the patient actually came into the ED with severe dehydration. That was treated for 1 hour and 30 minutes. So once again, I can code because nothing else was given. They gave him the fluid for dehydration. This is where medical necessity is so important. If you code IV hydration and they're not a medically necessary diagnosis, then sometimes it can be questioned as a keep vein open, especially if it's kind of slow. When I was learning how to code, and so you may have to check me out on this, But if that IV fluid ran at a slow rate, I think something like less than 60 cc's an hour or something like that, they generally would consider that as keeping the veins open. So once again, it's very important to have a medically necessary diagnosis. And only the physician know that. You know, we might just think of dehydration, but it may be other reasons. Maybe the patient is having a little bit of shock going on, like when the patient come in and had a bee sting. Well, they may need fluid. So once again, that's a physician determination, and you may get denial sometimes saying that it doesn't meet medical necessity, but you can always fight that. So the patient was seen in the ED with moderate dehydration. He was treated for 1 hour and 30 minutes for that. So the first hour would be a 96360. We would have to write off the 31 minutes because the add-on code of 96361 is for each additional hour. To get that code, it must run for at least another hour. And in this case, it was 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we get to be a 1 unit of 96360, and we write the other 30 minutes off. So that's in our lesson for infusion therapy, administration, drug coding. I hope it has been helpful for you. Hey, look, join us in your medical coding lounge. It is a membership for coders, by coders. We provide CEUs on a monthly basis. You have the opportunity to get up to 18 CEUs per year. We also do coding. We do coding updates when the new codes come out, be it ICD-10 or CPT. Follow me on TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Our website is www.mscodingsolutions.com. Look forward to seeing you soon.